Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Royal Society, I'd like to welcome you all here to the opening of the InterAcademy Panel for International Issues Triennial Conference and General Assembly. We at the Royal Society are especially delighted to be hosting all the world's academies during our 350th anniversary year. This is a year when we celebrate science and scientists over the past 4 centuries, but more importantly, where we look forward to what we might achieve together in future in increasing understanding and in changing the world. So, in spite of the cold weather, a very warm welcome to everyone who's come from all over the world to be here this week. And I'm especially delighted to welcome David Miliband, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. But before I introduce David, I'd like to ask the 2 co-chairs of the IAP to say a few words. And they are Howard Alper, who is from Canada, and Chen Zhu from China. And so I'd like to ask Howard to say a few words first.
Lord Rees and the Right Honourable David Milliband, ladies and gentlemen, it really is splendid for the Royal Society to host the IAP Conference and General Assembly in 2010. That's particularly so in terms of its 350th anniversary. Academies are important to a nation. They showcase excellence and leadership in different fields of endeavors. They educate and inform society on key issues. They undertake assessments which help shape policy for the future of a country. During the last 350 years, the Royal Society has served as a beacon to academies all over the world, with excellence as its signature. And the IAP, the Global Network of Science Academies, greatly values the major contributions which the Royal Society has made and is making and will make to the success of the IAP. Our organization, in contrast, is relatively new, founded 16 years ago. And in addition to capacity building for existing academies, as well as contributing to the establishment of new entities, new academies, the IAP influences the global communities through programs such as inquiry-based science education for school children, issuing statements on timely matters such as ocean acidification and tropical rainforests, both of which, I might add, were led by the Royal Society, and creating innovative partnerships, including a recent one with the World Economic Forum, thus integrating young scientists into the forum and enhancing sensitivity of the forum to science, technology, and innovation, key to economic advancement and societal well-being. It also holds conferences, such as the one tomorrow and the next day, and this conference is on biodiversity, and I'd like to ask Chen Zhu, the co-chair of IAP, to say a few words about the conference.
Thank you, Howard. Lord Rees, Your Excellency, Mr. Miliband, ladies and gentlemen, it's particularly fitting that IAP's General Assembly is being held here at the Royal Society, which was founded in the 17th century by a group of people who were not yet at that time described as scientists. But these remarkable individuals were driven by curiosity about the natural world, yet at the same time truly engaged in society and public affairs. They agreed to meet from time to time to discuss the then new experimental philosophy, adopting the motto, nullius in verba. This expressed their preference for verifiable observations and experiments over words or dogma. This intention seems obvious to us now, and indeed, the fruits of scientific and technological experiments and research have truly changed the world. The IAP is having its general conference on biodiversity tomorrow and the day after. Biodiversity is the basis for the existence and the development of human beings. It plays a critical and essential role in sustainable development, poverty eradication, human well-being, and the livelihood and the cultural integrity of people. It has a huge value of goods and services. Natural products from the biodiversity remain as the major source for new medicines. HIV/AIDS, SARS, Nipah virus, also H1N1, and other diseases have broken out in close relation to biodiversity loss. It is fully sensible that IAP has its General Conference on Biodiversity 2010 to mark this International Day year of biodiversity. I'm sure that our membership, which now exceeds 100, is looking forward to taking part in the conference, and I'm confident that it will be a successful one. I would like to thank you, hosts, for this splendid welcome and wish the Royal Society a very happy 350th birthday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's now my privilege to introduce the Foreign Secretary. We're honoured that you're here this afternoon to share your perspective on the role of science in international relations and foreign policy. And your presence testifies to the growing recognition of science's role in diplomacy, a role, incidentally, that the Royal Society articulates in its new report on New Frontiers in Science Diplomacy, launched just here today. David Miliband's welcome here, not just because of his current high office, because in his earlier ministerial career, his portfolios heavily engaged him in education, in environment, and in climate change. And I'm privileged to know him well enough to recognize his genuine commitments to all these issues. And that's where we're especially delighted that despite pressing engagements elsewhere, David's been able to come here this afternoon, and it's a great pleasure to invite him to address us. David.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you very much for that warm welcome. It is a huge honour and privilege for me to be here with you today, to be on a platform, such a distinguished platform, and to have as our chairman this afternoon, Martin Rees. I have been introduced by many people in my time, foreign secretaries, diplomats, dignitaries, even academics, but I think few can have offered so much to the well of human knowledge and done so much to be symbols of what it means to be an independent-minded thinker than Martin Rees. And his leadership of the Royal Society over the last 4 years, I think, has been extraordinary. And his contribution to British and international science means that, frankly, you could have asked me to come and do anything, and almost anything, and I would have felt obliged to do so, because I feel immensely proud to be Foreign Secretary of a country that produces people like Martin Rees, who lead organisations like the Royal Society. I want also, the second reason I'm here, not just that I'm in Martin's debt for his friendship of 15 or 20 years, but the second reason I'm here is that I think that a gathering like this of 200 or 300 of the world's most eminent scientists coming to London to debate some of the biggest issues of the future, centered on your theme of biodiversity, and to celebrate the history and achievements and future of the Royal Society, is something that speaks to what I believe should be a distinctive British contribution to not just international relations, but to international understanding. This country, by virtue of its history, its language, its network of connections around the world, can play the role of a global hub. And I believe that in the world of science, the Royal Society is playing that role. And as Foreign Secretary, I want you to know that your presence here is immensely valued, that your commitment to working with scientists from this country as well as with each other is something that we place in high store. And also that we are determined to think how, for the modern world, we can further the sort of international understanding that is evident in this room today. I've been asked to speak for about 15 minutes. You'll be relieved to hear this is not a 55-minute lecture. The politicians basically run to their limit at 15 to 20 minutes. You can add 10 minutes for interruptions.
Please
but,
overrun as much as you like.
No, I won't. Yeah. As I shall have the modesty to point out in a moment, my C in O-level chemistry and my D in A-level physics mean that I come here with a grave sense of caution and care about the topics that I'm going to talk about. But the Royal Society has just published quite an important and interesting report on science and diplomacy. And the essence of my remarks will be around some of the parallels between those two worlds, and also some of the connections that we need to build between the worlds of science and diplomacy. But I want to start by saying something about this notion that the Royal Society is emblematic of some virtues that I think are very important in our country. The advance of knowledge, international engagement, a meritocratic basis for a membership, not always a hallmark of this country, and also a commitment to what I would call the life of a public intellectual. Because as a non-scientist, I think that the commitment of the Royal Society's presidents and members to help shape debate in this country, even on the most controversial issues, whether it be GM foods or nuclear power, is something that is very, very important indeed. The Royal Society, as you know, is a fiercely independent institution, but its history is interwoven with that of the British government. It has advised successive British governments by demonstrating the value of experimental science and providing the best scientific thought to leaders and policymakers everywhere. And it's not only in its advice that the Royal Society offers leadership. The Royal Society had the foresight to appoint their own first Foreign Secretary 60 years before the first holder of the post of Foreign Secretary in the British government. The Royal Society also, I mean, the professor will know this, the Royal Society also had the foresight to choose one other attribute for its Foreign Secretary, which, for those of you who follow British politics, will seem particularly worthwhile, at least if you're in my position, which is that they appointed the Foreign Secretary of the Royal Society to a fixed 5-year term, which, for those of us who suffer the vagaries of electoral politics, offers a degree of certainty that is quite attractive. I want you to know that this is a country that hasn't just historically taken science very seriously. It's a country that takes science seriously today. We author about 8% of the world's scientific papers with just 1% of the world's population. And from Newton to the discovery of the double helix to the invention of the World Wide Web, we like to think that British science is at the forefront of breakthroughs that affect the lives of everyone. But if that is the record in science, we also like to see ourselves as global players in diplomacy. We have 261 diplomatic missions around the world in over 160 countries. And our foreign service gives us insight and influence the world over. Indeed, 17 of my predecessors as Foreign Secretary were actually fellows of the Royal Society. One of them, Lord Salisbury, who between 1878 and 1902 was 4 times Foreign Secretary and 3 times Prime Minister, was an enthusiastic amateur scientist. And he built a laboratory for himself at his house in Hatfield, where he conducted chemistry experiments. Those experiments practically killed him as one of his experiments exploded. And that is a reminder that science and diplomacy aren't always natural bedfellows. Indeed, the essence of scientific progress, it seems to me, is to be transformative, but also to be disruptive. And that is the focus, I suppose, on great inventions and scientific breakthroughs. The emphasis of, and the focus of diplomacy, however, is more to maintain order than to break it. And while science is in the business of establishing the truth, it has long been perceived that diplomats are there to obscure the truth. Henry Wotton, the famous 17th century diplomat, famously claimed that an ambassador is an honest man sent to lie abroad for the good of his country. And I hope that we do not live up to that talismanic quotation in the countries that you come from. But it seems to me that the links between science and diplomacy are, some of them are obvious, which I want to talk about in a minute, but there is a bright spark in the Foreign Office who has drawn my attention to a link that I think is more interesting. Your world is the world of science. It's the world I learnt about very poorly at school, and one of the things I learnt about was the replacement of Newtonian mechanics with quantum mechanics. A revolution in your world. My world is the world of foreign policy. And while I wouldn't want to hang everything on this parallel, if you think about it, the world of international relations is today undergoing a change as profound, I would argue, as the change brought in your world in the shift to quantum mechanics. We are experiencing our own quantum shift. And I just want to give you 3 examples of that. First, the international relations until quite recently was premised on the idea of a balance of power. There was the idea that the international system tended towards equilibrium and self-correction. There was the idea that states would balance each other's economic and social and military strengths. In a way, this was an echo of the world of Newtonian mechanics. But today, the world of diplomacy, the issues that I spend my time on, are not defined by careful balance. There is a tendency towards imbalance and asymmetry, mirroring the world, as I understand it, of quantum mechanics. Think of the emergence of the asymmetric tactics of terrorist organizations, leading not to a stable balance of opposing forces, but to chronic instability. Think of the damaging positive feedback loops for international security from the feedback loops that are driving runaway climate change and that build up unsustainable financial imbalances between emerging and existing powers. These are ways in which the issues that I deal with are no longer the conventional business of international relations. Second, think of the actors involved in international relations today. For the first time in a very, very long time, those actors that students of international relations learn about at university are no longer just nation states. Any course on international relations will teach about the importance of global NGOs, multinational businesses, media and social networking sites, formal and informal international institutions that constrain and shape the preferences and actions of nation states. A fundamental shift in the way in which power is exercised and constrained in my world. And thirdly, if I understand it correctly, Newtonian science was modeled on discrete, independent systems, while quantum mechanics accepts that everything is interconnected. It's therefore striking that in the modern world of international relations, the word that is used more often than any other to describe foreign policy is interdependence. Foreign policy is no longer a game of risk or chess in 2 dimensions. It is more multidimensional. As a result, the world is more unpredictable and more uncertain. Every action does not have an equal and opposite reaction. Sometimes it is small interventions that catalyze major changes. I was in Pakistan at the weekend. There has been a fundamental change in the last year in Pakistan in the attitude of the people of Pakistan to the terrorist threat that faces their country. There has been a fundamental change in the attitude of the military to that terrorist threat. What catalyzed it? Not the billions of dollars in US funding of the military, but instead the public outrage at the image of a 17-year-old girl being flogged by Taliban militants in the Swat Valley in the north of Pakistan. Foreign policy today is about managing interdependence and uncertainty and finding the game-changing interventions that can break the deadlock. The old world of foreign policy, of course, remains. Relations between states, sometimes strained and sometimes cooperative, remains immensely important. In Europe, I'm pleased to say that that world has become bound up in the largest experiment in shared sovereignty that has ever been tried, namely in the European Union. But in the new world of foreign policy, ungoverned spaces, whether in Somalia or perhaps in Yemen or in Afghanistan, those ungoverned spaces, they are the diplomatic equivalent of black holes. And non-state actors, they are the quarks of diplomacy. In this new world, more than any other, I think we have to think through how science and diplomacy can work together. And I just want to devote the second half of my remarks to that. I think that when we talk about science and diplomacy, the first and most evident thing to remark is how much scientific progress can help us with the foreign policy challenges that we face. In simple terms, scientific progress can achieve breakthroughs that diplomacy simply cannot match. The development of commercially viable carbon capture and storage mechanisms or advances in the technology for low-carbon vehicles can have a major impact on our ability to forge the green revolution that we need to avoid dangerous climate change. Genetic improvement of crop plants could rescue many millions from the endless cycle of poverty, hunger, and violence that so infects much of our world, and which so much effort in pursuit of the Millennium Development Goals scratches the surface but does not fundamentally change. And in areas such as cybersecurity, biodefense, or early warning systems for natural disasters, it is science that holds the key to our future security. Second, science can help forge consensus where there is political division. Thomas Paine once said that an army of principles can penetrate where an army of soldiers cannot. I hope that applies to scientific principles as well as political ones. During the Cold War, technologies to verify arms control agreements were a rare focus for joint working between the USA and the USSR. In Europe, CERN helped rebuild links between nations, establishing the first post-war contacts between German and Israeli scientists, keeping open relations between Western and Eastern Europe. Science can and should be used to break down the barriers of the 21st century, particularly those between the Western and Muslim-majority countries. Projects like the new synchrotron light source in Jordan are leading the way, bringing together scientists from Bahrain, Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, Iran, Jordan, the Palestinian Authority, Turkey, and Pakistan to build a bright light source for cutting-edge experiments in materials, science, and biology. Imagine the trouble I would have in trying to convene a meeting of foreign ministers of those dozen countries. Third, science's power to shift debates and catalyze political action. This is critical if we're to protect and promote global public goods for future generations, which the climate change example illustrates. I believe it has been the convergence of views within the scientific community that has set the tone for the political debate about climate change in many countries over recent years. It still has a way to go, as I shall come on to argue. But the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, rightly won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007 for its efforts to forge a global consensus around the science of climate change. Although we did not secure from the Copenhagen summit the ambitious, legally binding treaty that this government, and I'm sure many of you, wanted, no one can deny how far the global debate has come in recent years. And with an eye to the future, scientists and diplomats must continue to work together not just on climate, but on resource scarcity more generally. I've talked previously about an impending resource crunch, which gets far less coverage than the credit crunch, but is actually a fundamental part of our world. With foreign policy increasingly shaped by shortages of energy, food, and water. One example In the Yemen, they are likely to run out of oil in the next 5 years, and Sana'a is on track to be the world's first capital suffering water shortage. The resource questions and the wider economic and social and political questions are closely linked. Scientific collaboration to establish a shared understanding of the risks and the solutions will be critical to mobilizing action and preventing a world of new tensions and stresses. But just as science can support diplomacy, so too I think diplomacy needs to support science. The most ambitious, game-changing scientific innovations increasingly seem to require collaboration across disciplinary and territorial borders. For example, the Genome Project, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, the Large Hadron Collider are projects that require huge upfront investments beyond the budget of any one country. Even on a smaller scale, contract negotiations, intellectual property agreements, or visa regulations require an open and engaged and supportive diplomatic world. Of course, competition between countries remains, and we need to strengthen national science and innovation systems. But increasingly, we need to facilitate networks that enable scientific collaboration across countries in pursuit of shared goals. That, I think, is the significance of some of the scientific programs of the European Union, and it also explains the regular meetings on science and innovation with Brazil, China, India, Russia, South Africa, and South Korea, to name but a few, that the UK holds. In the 21st century, developments in neuroscience, chemical and biological weapons, cyber technology will all pose new risks. Diplomacy is going to have to establish the rules, the norms, and the governance structures to manage them. Martin, let me just end with a few words about British efforts to support science diplomacy and international collaboration. Because after more than a decade of unprecedented investment, I'm proud to say that the UK is now rated first or second in the world in research in many disciplines. Not just in universities, but a world-class science base that has brought companies from Fujitsu Telecoms to Boeing or IBM to our shores. To make the most of that strength, we need a strong program of action abroad as well as at home. That is the significance of the Science and Innovation Network, which was initiated by the Foreign Office some 9 years ago. Around 90 staff in 40 embassies, high commissions, and consulates around the world. This network maps out and catalyzes new collaborations between the best scientists in the UK and overseas. It gives our researchers access to the best science and the best facilities globally, such as the Japanese Earth simulator, where a deal brokered by the Science and Innovation Network has meant UK climate research science has been 1 to 2 years ahead of where it would have been. Or in the US, where earlier this year the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine invested $36 million in a joint collaboration with the UK Medical Research Council following our work. Last year, I appointed a chief scientific advisor to the Foreign Office, Professor David Clary, who's here today. And scientific diplomacy will be a significant component of his work, using the Science and Innovation Network and other diplomats around the world. Meanwhile, the British Council, the independent cultural arm of Britain for spreading our ideas and values around the world, has many important scientific initiatives, including its programme for bringing together young researchers from the UK and other countries to promote the creative exchange of ideas through conferences. And last but not least, the Royal Society. The Royal Society too has renewed itself, whether through the establishment during the UK's G8 presidency in 2005 of regular meetings between the G8+5 science academies, or last June's conference on new frontiers in science diplomacy. This institution has played a critical role in bridging the gap between the two disciplines in recent years. I'm sure that with the establishment of the Science Policy Centre as part of the 350th anniversary celebrations, we will see further strengthened the voice of science, not just in the UK, but in European and international politics. Some might think that after 350 years, there was a danger that the Royal Society might become complacent. I have seen no evidence of that, as many of you compete to wrest from the Royal Society the crowns and the laurels that it has gained over the 350 years. Let me just end with the two disciplines of science and politics, because the future of the planet depends above all on politics. But I also know that the lives of millions of people depend on developments in the physical and natural sciences. Politics and science need to come closer together, not for politics to smother science. In fact, an open regulatory regime is a vital part of any national scientific policy, but instead to be informed by its potential. The frustrations of the climate change talks show how far we have to go. Here, the science is overwhelming. It really is a consensus. The need is urgent, but the politics is blocked. Despite all the campaigns and all the efforts, we don't yet have the global treaty on emissions reductions that the world desperately needs. And if we cannot find a way to cooperate to ensure our own safety and security, then our descendants will look back and wonder whether we have really learned the lessons of 350 years of history. My closing thought is therefore this. The scientific world is becoming more interdisciplinary, but the biggest interdisciplinary leap that we need is across the boundaries of politics and science. We need you on resource conflicts, global inequality, nuclear security and counterterrorism. Science should be our ally. I hope this anniversary opens eyes not just to how far science has come in 350 years, but what we can do together in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Foreign Secretary, this is a wonderful opportunity for one Foreign Secretary to talk to another. And though, as you said, my post was created rather longer ago than yours, I think I'll have to agree that yours is a little more weighty. So it's with particular pleasure that I thank you for being here this afternoon and giving your comments on the growing interdependence between science and international relations. Now, I'm sure you would agree that science academies throughout the world have a part to play in this relationship. The InterAcademy Panel is an excellent example. From the Royal Society, the oldest academy, to the academies of Mozambique and Nicaragua, the youngest, the IAP now has 103 members from all over the globe. IAP is the United Nations of science, demonstrating that often scientists succeed where politicians fail, working together for the greater good whilst their countries may be mired in conflict. David Miliband, we know how busy you are. Thank you for giving us your time this afternoon. Thank you for being here to join with the IAP in celebrating our 350th year, and this, of course, is the biggest international event starting our year. Thank you.